Alright, greetings everybody. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. Past couple episodes we have been reading Arthas. We read kind of how he had a friendship with Jaina. We also saw the tragedy that befell Invincible and how he was mortally wounded and had to be put down. Which does explain how Invincible is an undead horse, like not just some horse, like because obviously if he's undead, he's going to die at some point. So I guess it's good to see that when he does get Invincible back, which I'm sure we'll read about later in this novel, that it's like a reuniting. It's not anything part of the dark side. Like it's going to be one of the positive aspects of him becoming the Lich King. All right, so stay a while and listen to Chapter 5. It's the last chapter in the first part, the first kind of phase, because this book is broken down into these different phases. The second phase, which we'll read soon, covers all of Warcraft 3. All right, here we go. Summer was in full blaze, and the merciless sun beat down on His Royal Highness Prince Arthas Menethil as he rode through the streets of Stormwind. He was in a foul mood, despite the fact that this was a day that he was supposed to have been looking forward to all his life. The sun glinted off the full plate armor he wore, and Arthas thought he'd baked to death before he reached the cathedral. Sitting atop his new charger only served to remind him that the horse, while powerful, well-trained, and well-bred, was not invincible, gone for only a few months and bitterly missed. And he found that his mind had suddenly gone blank regarding what he was supposed to do once the ceremony began, so he's probably right about 19 now. Beside him rode his father, who seemed completely unaware of his son's irritation. "This has been a day long in coming, my son," Taranis said, turning to smile at Arthas. Despite the heat and the weight of the helm he wore, Arthas was glad of it. It concealed his face, and he wasn't sure he could fake a convincing smile right now. "Indeed it has, father," he replied, keeping his voice calm. It was one of the biggest celebrations Stormwind had ever seen. In addition to Taranis, many other kings, nobility, and famous personages were in attendance, riding like a parade through the city's white-cobbled streets, the massive cathedral of light, damaged during the First War, but now restored and even more glorious than before. Arthas' boyhood friend Varian, king of Stormwind, was now married and a new father. He had opened the palace to all the visiting royalty and their retinues. Sitting with Varian last night, drinking mead and talking, had been the highlight of the trip for Arthas so far. The herding, traumatized youth of a decade ago had grown into a confident, handsome, centered king. Somewhere along about early morning, after midnight and before dawn, they had gone to the armory, fetched wooden training swords, and gone at each other for a long time, laughing and recounting memories, their prowess only a little worse for the alcohol they'd consumed. Varian, trained since early childhood, had always been good, and now he was better, but so was Arthas, and he gave as good as he got. But now it was all formality, incredibly hot armor, and a nagging sense that he didn't deserve the honor that was about to be bestowed upon him. In a rare moment, Arthas had spoken of his feelings to Uther, the intimidating paladin who, since Arthas was old enough to remember, had been the very image of rock-solid steadfastness to the light, had startled the prince with his reply. "Lad, no one feels ready. No one feels he deserves it. And you know why? Because no one does. It's grace, pure and simple. We are inherently unworthy simply because we're human, and all human beings, I and elves and dwarves and all the other races, are flawed. But the light loves us anyway. It loves us for what we sometimes can rise to in rare moments. It loves us for what we can do to help others, and it loves us because we can help it share its message by striving daily to be worthy, even though we understand that we can't ever truly become so." He clapped a hand on Arthas' shoulder, giving him a rare, simple smile. "So stand there today as I did, feeling that you can't possibly deserve it or ever be worthy, and know that you're in the same place every single paladin has ever stood." It comforted Arthas a little. He squared his shoulders, tilted the visor back, and smiled and waved to the crowd that was cheering so happily on this hot summer day. Rose petals were showered upon him, and from somewhere trumpets blared. They had reached the cathedral. Arthas dismounted, and a groom led away his charger. Another servant stepped up to take the helm he tugged off. His blond hair was damp with sweat, and he quickly ran a gauntleted hand over it. Arthas had never been to Stormwind before, and he was impressed by the combination of serenity and power the cathedral radiated. Slowly, he moved up the carpeted, carved stairs, grateful for the sudden coolness of the building's stone interior. The fragrance of the incense was calming and familiar. It was the same as that which his family burned in their small chapel. There was no giddy throng here now, just silent, respectful rows of prominent personages and clergy. Arthas recognized several faces: Gen Greymane, Thoris Trollbane, Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, so this must be before the Alliance splinters. Arthas blinked, then his lips curved into a smile. Jaina. She had certainly grown up in the years since he had last seen her. Not quite a drop-dead beauty, but pretty. The liveliness and intelligence he'd responded to as a boy still radiating from her like a beacon. She caught Arthas's look and smiled a little in return, inclining her head in respect. Arthas returned his attention to the altar. He approached, but felt a little bit of the trepidation leave his heart. He hoped there would be a chance for him to talk to her after all the formalities were taken care of. Archbishop Alonsus Fowl awaited him at the altar. The Archbishop reminded Arthas more of Great Father Winter than of any of the rulers he had hitherto met. Short and stout, with a long flowing snow-white beard and bright eyes, even in the midst of solemn ceremony, Fowl radiated warmth and kindliness. Fowl waited until Arthas approached him and knelt before him respectfully before opening a large book and speaking. In the light we gather to empower our brother. In its grace he will be made anew. In its power he shall educate the masses. In its strength he shall combat the shadow. And in its wisdom he shall lead his brethren to the eternal rewards of paradise. On his left, several men and a few women, Arthas noticed, dressed in flowing white robes, stood still and poised. Some held censers, which swayed almost hypnotically. Others bore large candles. One carried an embroidered blue stole. Arthas had been introduced to many of them earlier, but found that their names had gone right out of his head. That was unusual for him. He was genuinely interested in those who worked for him and served under him, and made an effort to get to know all their names. Archbishop Fowl asked the clerics to bestow their blessings upon Arthas. They did, the one who bore the blue stole coming forward to drape it about the prince's neck and anointing his brow with holy oil. By the grace of the light may your brethren be healed, the cleric said. Fowl turned to the men on Arthas's right. Knights of the Silver Hand, if you deem this man worthy, place your blessings upon him. In contrast to the first group, these men, standing at attention in heavy, gleaming plate armor, were all known to Arthas. They were the original paladins of the Silver Hand, and it was the first time they had assembled since their induction many years past. Uther, of course, Tyrion Fordring, aging but still powerful and graceful, now governor of Hearthglen, the 6.5-foot Sidon Dathrahan, and the pious, bushy-bearded Gavinrad. One was missing from their number, Turalion, right hand to Anduin Lothar in the Second War, who was lost with the company that had ventured through the Dark Portal when Arthas was 12. We also recently read that coming up for Tyrion is that he's going to be disavowed from everyone else for protecting an orc. We know Uther will tear himself apart for the role he plays in training Arthas, and eventually will die, become one of the Dark Bastion people, and be redeemed. And I don't know about Gavinrad or Dathrahan. Yeah. Turalion, yeah, he'll eventually make his way back as well. But he is, yeah, out. He's currently in, what's it called? Argus, fighting the Legion. Gavinrad stepped forth holding an enormous, heavy-looking hammer, its silver head etched with runes and its sturdy haft wrapped in blue leather. He placed the hammer in front of Arthas, then stepped back to stand with his brethren. It was Uther the Lightbringer himself, Arthas' mentor in the Order, who next came forward. In his hands he carried a pair of ornamental shoulder plates. Uther was the most controlled man Arthas had ever known, and yet his eyes were bright with unshed tears as he placed the armor on Arthas' broad shoulders. He spoke in a voice that was both powerful and trembling with emotion. By the strength of the light, may your enemies be undone. His hand lingered a moment on Arthas' shoulder, then he too retreated. Archbishop Fowl smiled at the prince kindly. Arthas met the gaze evenly, no longer worried. He remembered everything now. I believe Archbishop Fowl eventually becomes evil. Or maybe not evil. I don't know what you would call it, but I think he becomes one of the Forsaken. And I don't know if he's part of the Scarlet Crusade or... Yeah. Arise and be recognized, Fowl bade him. Arthas did so. Do you, Arthas Menethil, vow to uphold the honor and codes of the Order of the Silver Hand? Arthas blinked, momentarily surprised at the lack of his title. Of course, he reasoned, I'm being inducted as a man, not a prince. I do. Do you vow to walk in the grace of the light and spread its wisdom to your fellow man? I do. You vow to vanquish evil wherever it be found and protect the innocent with your very life. By my blood and honor, I do. That was close, he'd almost messed up. Val gave him a quick wink of reassurance, then turned to address both the clerics and the paladins. Brothers and sisters, you who have gathered here to bear witness, raise your hands and let the light illuminate this man. The clerics and paladins all lifted right hands, which were now suffused by a soft golden glow. They pointed at Arthas, directing the radiance toward him. Arthas's eyes were wide with wonder, and he waited for the glorious glow to envelop him. Nothing happened. The moment stretched on. Sweat broke out on Arthas's brow. What was going wrong? Why wasn't the light wrapping itself around him in blessing and benediction? And then the sunlight streaming in through windows in the ceiling slowly began to move toward the prince, standing alone in shining armor, and Arthas exhaled in relief. This had to be what Uther had spoken of. The feeling of unworthiness that Uther assured him all paladins felt simply seemed to drag out the moment. The words Uther had spoken came back to him. No one feels he deserves it. Its grace pure and simple, but the light loves us anyway. Now it shone down on him, in him, through him, and he was forced to shut his eyes against the almost blinding radiance. It warmed at first, then seared, and he winced slightly. He felt scoured, emptied, scrubbed clean, then filled again, and he felt the light swell inside him, and then fade away to a tolerable level. He blinked and reached for the hammer, the symbol of the order. As his hand closed about the haft, he looked up at Archbishop Fowl, whose benign smile widened. Arise, Arthas Menethil, Paladin Defender of Lordaeron. Welcome to the Order of the Silver Hand. Arthas couldn't help it. He grinned as he grasped the enormous hammer, so large that for a brief moment he thought he wouldn't be able to lift it, and swung it upward with a whoop. The light, he realized, made the hammer seem to weigh less in his hands. At his exultant cry, the cathedral suddenly began to ring with the sound of answering cheers and applause. Arthas found himself roughly embraced by his new brothers and sisters, and then all remnants of formality were torn away as his father, Varian, and others crowded the altar area. Much laughter was had as Varian tried to clap him on the shoulder, only to have his hands sting when he struck the hard metal of the shoulder plates. And then somehow Arthas was turned around and stared into the blue-eyed, smiling face of Lady Jaina Proudmoore. They were mere inches apart, jostled and pressed together by the throng that had somehow sprung up around the newest member of the Order of the Silver Hand, and Arthas wasn't about to let the unique opportunity slip away. Almost at once his left arm slipped around her trim waist and he pulled her to him. She looked startled but not displeased as he hugged her. She returned the hug, laughing against his chest for a moment, then pulling him back, still smiling. For a moment the happy sounds of a celebrating crowd on a hot summer afternoon went away, and all Arthas could see was the sun-tanned, smiling girl. Could he kiss her? Should he kiss her? He certainly wanted to, but even as he debated, she disentangled herself and stepped back, and her fair-haired girlish form was replaced by another fair-haired girlish form. Kalia laughed and hugged her brother tightly. "We're all so proud of you, Arthas," she exclaimed. He grinned and returned the embrace, happy to hear his sister's approval, sorry that he'd not gone ahead and kissed the Admiral's daughter. "You'll make a wonderful paladin, I'm sure of it." "Well done, my son," Turnus said. "I am a proud father today." Arthas's eyes narrowed. Today? What was meant by that? Was his father not proud of him on other days? He was suddenly angry and not certain why or with whom. The light delaying its approval, Jaina backing away from him right at the moment when he could have kissed her. Tyrannus and his comment. He forced a smile and began to shoulder his way through the crowd. He'd had enough of this press of people, few of whom really knew him, none of whom understood. Arthas was 19. At the same age Varian had been king for a full year. He was of an age to do whatever he wanted to, and now had the blessing of the Silver Hand to guide him. He didn't want to simply linger at the Palace of Lordaeron or do boring state visits. He wanted to do something fun. Something that his power, his position, his abilities would earn him. And he knew exactly what he wanted that something to be. So I wonder what that is foreshadowing, something in part 2. And we don't know, we know that, here's my thought as a possibility. I'm not saying like this is 100% what I think is going to happen, but we know that the Lich King has the power, the current Lich King, to send out thought waves and recruit. That's how we got Kel'Thuzad. Could he be doing something to Arthas? Because you know Arthas is eventually going to move that way and become the next one. So we'll see. All right, we got this episode in the Pipe 5x5. We got this whole section in the Pipe 5x5. We'll do a little bit more. I think. We're probably going to do the novel next, the Lord of the Clans novel, because that's a big thing. And for some reason, something is intriguing about that, because since I posted that video just a couple episodes again, like, it's getting massive amounts of views for me. So it'd be interesting to read the novel as well and see if people are interested in that. All right, guys, I appreciate everything. Hopefully you enjoyed watching it. I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.